Good morning. This is Haley Solomon with the North Carolina Housing Coalition. Thank you for joining us this morning for our housing call. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our Director of Housing Policy, Stephanie Watkins-Cruz.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you all are having a great week so far. Going to go ahead and kick off our call with an organizational update. If you were not able to join us for the post-election analysis and update webinar that we hosted on December 4th, you can view a summary of what we talked about during that webinar, as well as the recording in a call link that we'll include in the call notes for you. Also need to mention that today, this call is the final housing call of 2024, and that our first housing call of 2025 will be on January 14th. So we'll give you a few weeks off from the housing call, but we will see you again on January 14th. Going to go ahead and go straight into federal updates. As less than a week left, Congress still has not funded Helene disaster relief. So Congress has until this Friday to pass a stopgap spending bill and avoid a partial government shutdown. Speaker Johnson said the bill text would be released by Sunday, but we are still waiting. And since this is the last legislative vehicle for this Congress, we've heard about some last-minute disagreements on other provisions in the bill that are delaying its release. This bill is also expected to include, between $90 and $100 billion in disaster relief funds, as well as a temporary extension of the Farm Bill, which authorizes funds and funds vital programs like the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA's rural housing programs, as well as a Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. Once passed, it's expected that this continuing resolution, which is the second since the federal fiscal year started on October 1st, is going to keep the government funded through March 14th. So as we learn more, we will keep you all posted on that. Moving into state updates. Last week, at the end of the week, an updated damages and needs assessment for Hurricane Helene was released. And so the total in damages is going to give you all a few highlights. In the initial assessment that was released at the end of October, the total was around $53.6 billion, and this has now gone up to around $59.6 billion. In the initial assessment, there was also an estimated $41.1 billion in direct damages. This number is now $44.4 billion. There was an estimated $7.6 billion in indirect or induced damages, and this number is now around $9.4 billion. And in the housing section of this assessment in particular, the estimated housing need in the first assessment was $14.8 billion, and in the updated assessment, this number is now closer to $15.5 billion. So we'll continue to look through this report and do the comparisons. And as we know more, we'll let you know more. At the state level, North Carolina Republicans also last week in the House overrode Governor Cooper's veto of Senate Bill 382 with a 72-46 vote, with all Republicans voting in favor of overriding the veto and all Democrats voting against it. This bill, in particular for Hurricane Helene funding, actually only provides $27 million that can be spent right away, and leaves another $225 million that will require further legislative action that likely will not happen until February before this money can be spent. Also last week, the Tropical Storm Helene Subcommittee, the House Select Committee, was held, and a lot of data was shared. Just to give you all a few, they heard from the State Budget Director, Kristen Walker. They also heard from the Department of Emergency Management, as well as a few other nonprofit organizations on damages and efforts for Hurricane Helene to date. So some of the response data given from the North Carolina Department of Public Safety, NCDPS, was that over 3,100 personnel responded to the Helene disaster. Over 1,200 vehicles were utilized, 10 aircraft were deployed, 1,200 medical patient encounters have been cataloged. There are over 1,600 responders from outside of North Carolina that have been part of the recovery effort, and support has come from 39 states, 3 territories, and 2 countries. In the presentation from the State Budget Director, there is about There was about 1,400 different landslides that they've documented. 900,000 homes and businesses were without power, and this covered the 39 FEMA disaster declared counties. There was 103 North Carolina deaths and a total of over 30 inches of total rainfall, which puts this storm as in the category of a 1,000-year flood. A lot of these numbers also in this presentation are what are in the updated damages and needs assessment report that we have linked in the call notes. But as FEMA and as DPS and emergency management gather more information and data from applications and from encounters and engagements, these numbers will likely continue to be updated. And as we have already seen, the total need has gone up. Additional Helene updates for those in Western North Carolina. FEMA will continue to have a job fair and resume workshops. There is one today, a federal resume building workshop today at the Embassy Suites in Asheville. There's also a job fair and hiring event happening tomorrow, also at the Embassy Suites. There will be FEMA specialists on site to offer in-person advice on rebuilding at 2 different locations in Buncombe and Henderson counties to offer free home improvement tips, as well as different methods and best practices to lessen damage and prepare for any future disasters. So they'll be there at the Home Depot on Fairview Road in Asheville all week this week from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., as well as the Home Depot on 401 Linda Vista Drive in Hendersonville, starting next week on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, as well as Saturday from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Also looking at FEMA, we now know that FEMA has issued over $292 million in North Carolina public assistance grants. So they dispersed this $292 million throughout Western North Carolina in the wake of Helene. Just a little context, the FEMA Public Assistance Program provides reimbursement to local, tribal, and state government agencies for the cost of emergency response, debris removal, and restoration of disaster-damaged public facilities and infrastructure. And also the program can reimburse certain private nonprofits or houses of worship for response and recovery items. So in this total, what's included in this total is about $146.3 million to North Carolina Emergency Management for emergency protective measures, as well as $20.5 million for disaster management costs. There's been over $78 million given for debris removal funding, and more than $47.3 million in federal funds have been obligated to the North Carolina Department of Transportation and to DOT for repairs to roads and bridges in multiple counties. Just a note that FEMA encourages that FEMA is encouraging, that transitional sheltering assistance participants, so TSA, those participating in TSA, speak with hotel and motel staff ASAP, as soon as possible, about extending their reservations through the Christmas and New Year's holidays. If a hotel or motel is unable to extend a reservation due to pre-existing reservations, FEMA staff can and will help participants find other lodging options participating in the TSA program. Other important reminders: Buncombe County's Helene Recovery Housing Assistance Grant Program can provide up to 3 months of rent, mortgage, or home utility bills for U.S. citizens living in Buncombe County, earning up to 80% of the AMI, and the applications for that program close tomorrow, December 18th at 5 p.m. The FEMA Individual Assistance Application deadline is January 7th, 2025, and the FEMA Transitional Sheltering Assistance Program, TSA program, has been extended to January 11th, 2025. And all of these links will be included in the call notes. Local updates. Earlier this month, Friendship for Affordable Housing closed on a former Ramada Inn site in East Asheville. And the plan for the development of the Ramada Inn site has been a really long and contentious process. The previous developer of the site lost the property to foreclosure last winter, and days before Helene hit Western North Carolina, the Asheville City Council approved the plan to build 50 affordable apartments for rent to households earning less than 50% of area median income, as well as 50 units of permanent supportive housing. And so once the permits are approved, it is anticipated that this development will take about a year to complete. At last week's Charlotte City Council meeting, a large group of tenants and community advocates from One MEC and Action NC asked City Council to take action against certain landlords who are breaking housing code and are failing to fix deteriorating housing conditions. This request comes after residents were displaced in recent weeks from 2 different naturally occurring affordable housing or NOAA communities. And according to the residents, the new owners at Tanglewood Apartments have consistently failed to make emergency repairs and have been unjustly evicting tenants. Across town, also in Charlotte, the residents at the Lamplighter Inn motel were being displaced after the motel failed to bring several health and safety issues up to code. So the 2 advocacy groups are asking council to direct code enforcement to develop stronger enforcement policies and to identify funding to support the effort. Moving on to reports and resources. The National Income Housing Coalition has released a report summarizing different efforts on the November 2024 election. So how different ways that housing and homelessness showed up on ballots across the country. This report summarizes nearly 100 state and local ballot measures that address affordable housing and homelessness that were voted on in the November 2024 elections. And they divide up the ballot measures into 6 categories, looking at bond measures, measures dealing with the reallocation and preservation of existing resources, taxes and fees, tenant protections, zoning, land use, and other regulations, and the final category, punitive policies responding to homelessness. There's also another great piece from the U.S. Department of Treasury looking at the housing crisis in focus and examining LIHTC, the low-income housing tax credit, best practices to discourage qualified contracts and keep housing affordable for longer. And then there's another report out of HUD titled An Affordable Housing Implementation Guide, looking at maintaining revolving loans to provide sustained financing for affordable housing production. There are several pieces in the news as well that we'll keep in the call notes for you to check out. But we could not let this last call end without really saying thank you. So we can't believe it's been another year, another full year of housing calls. This is actually housing call number 45 to be exact. And really just wanted to take a moment to thank you, whether you listen to the call live, whether you just look at the notes, whether you have gone back and listened to recordings, or you're only able to listen to recordings sometimes, or you've just shared or talked to folks about it. I really enjoyed meeting a lot of the folks that listened to the housing call this year. It was really wonderful to meet you, folks from across the state and even a few from across the region. It's really nice to know that this continues to be a helpful tool and a helpful point of engagement for you all in this work. I also want to say that this means that a lot of you recognize that affordable homes are foundational to vibrant, healthy communities. And so as we turn our eyes to meeting that challenge in 2025, we just want to recognize that our state faces some incredible headwinds. We're looking at an unprecedented hurricane recovery effort in Western North Carolina that we know has damaged very close to 200,000 homes. A new gubernatorial and legislative state leadership who will lead that recovery effort, as well as an uncertain federal funding and administrative landscape with new leadership in Washington, D.C. So whether you have joined us live or have listened to the recording again or just looked at the call notes, you've been a big part of supporting our work, and I just want to take a moment and ask that you consider to continue doing so and encourage others in your network to do so as well. Please think about helping us ensure that North Carolina's community-powered housing ecosystem is equipped to make just and affordable communities a reality across our state. And for more than 3 decades, the North Carolina Housing Coalition, we've tried to step into that gap to meet immediate housing needs and reinforce the state's housing infrastructure. There's so much great work happening across our state at multiple levels and at different ends of the housing ecosystem. And so as we face these challenges in the new year, we really invite you to step into those gaps with us. And so here's just a little overview. If you decide to donate, your donations support our ability to convene, to reinforce, to resource, and to mobilize throughout the year. So allow us to continue to host Housing Matters to North Carolina, have weekly housing news and policy updates, to create our local housing policy blueprint for communities across the state, and to continue educating elected officials and decision makers at all levels on affordable housing policy and advocating for the resources and policies that we need to make the greatest impact, as well as the continued training and networking with North Carolina's community-powered ecosystem at events like Bringing It Home and North Carolina Affordable Housing Conferences, as well as other workshops and information sessions throughout the year. We cannot do this work alone, and we don't do it alone. So we really thank you for lending your voice and your financial support to ensuring that every North Carolinian has a home in which to live with dignity and opportunity. As always, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or you'd like us to have a special focus on a housing call in the new year. But until then, I hope you have a safe and wonderful rest of your year, and we will see you again on January 14th for our first housing call of 2025. Talk to you next time.